Okay, well everyone, welcome. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started with everything. Friday is a fire drill day. Over here it was supposed to have happened at 8 o'clock this morning, so hopefully we're not going to have any drill here. Over in the hotel it's at 11 o'clock today or thereabouts, so if you have to be over there that might be a drill around that time, but in this building we're not expecting any drill, so if the alarm does go off, then it's a real one, in which case exit and congregate in the lower car park. If it's feasible, try and think about wearing face coverings, but obviously when you're talking that's not really going to work and asking questions, so we need to kind of just be sensible about those things. Phones, please keep them on silent. There is filming going on today, so if for any reason you do not want to be captured for posterity, I suggest you sit at the back and bear in mind that that's where the camera is, you can duck underneath it. And basically today is happening because of our sponsors, Romero, AXA and UPT have graciously helped support this event. So that's just my bit of housekeeping. And we should start. He says. I don't need this for the volume, so somebody can turn me down a bit if I need to, but it's just for the recording side of things. So we're going to start this morning with just looking at some of the reports that we've had come in over the last 2 years. Those of you that have watched the SDC minutes and what have you will have seen some of these, and I'm just going to reflect on a few of them. There were at least 3 reports that crossed the desk over fabric failure, and were covered in rigging matters at SDC. A 22-year-old techno, so Parachutes France, life their canopies on repacks rather than age. A tandem main with 1400 jumps and the standard main with 1500 jumps. The thing really to there is just we're looking at age and condition and what they're treated with. So the orange canopy was an interesting one in terms of orange does fade more. Some colours are definitely seem to be more light sensitive, and you can even see on that picture that there are areas where it's quite faded. So it's things to look out for. And one of the things that later on today we might want to consider is, do we need to do main inspections on a regular basis and some sort of thing going on there, because we took it out of the repack inspection. The mains doesn't have to happen, like some of us do them, but it's normally down to the owners to go, can you have a look at this? And it's normally when something's gone wrong. So maybe that's something we need to start thinking of, or getting our members to think about where we go with different conditions of things. Line sets, I think we've kind of got into. People do look at those now, but once you start seeing fading and degradation on canopies, just something to be aware of, really. Feel free to chip in if anyone's got any questions.
Sorry, Pete.
Yeah.
When did the fabric failure of the techno happen? Was it on deployment?
No, it was in inspection. It was a discoloured area, and it was then just basically inspected and tested. So the fabric test was done, and it went at £28.
Oh.
So fortunately it wasn't catastrophic, it was picked up by the packer, really, in that case. So yeah, happy to say. A couple of issues with Avalon rigs that I became aware of. There was a ripcord that basically was producing over force pulls and what have you. New ripcord came from the manufacturer, Spectral one, and that wasn't a problem. Basically the packer on that one had just decided that feels a bit strong, put a metal ripcord in, no, that's fine. So then we realised it was something to do with the ripcord. We've had problems with Spectral ripcords not being the right length, and some of them had coatings on them that then created more of a problem than they were solved. So again, they're still out there. Different manufacturers are having things that we had with UPT or with other people in the past. So it's just because this was Avalon, maybe we don't need to think about it, but yeah, other manufacturers have similar problems. And the stitch pattern is very similar to a problem that we had with the Vector 3s. And that's the shoulder stitching up here. It's inside the pack tray. And when we found that, it looked fine because the bar tacks was still there inside on the reserve tray. They just weren't connected through. They'd actually broken, so it still looked right until you put your hand in and realised it wasn't stitched through. So they then said, no, we're changing the pattern into that C shape, or you can do the same pattern as UPT do. So if you've got that system of doing the E shape, then Avalon said that's absolutely fine. So you may have come across these as we've gone through. Just put a bit in. Missing bar tacks. Well, there were a few reports on missing bar tacks. This one was after a reline, and then when the course of packing, they kind of went, oh, this line's a bit long, and when they looked, it actually slid out, and it was just a missed bar tack. And obviously a missed check when the person had done the line set. It's easily done. That's why you should check it and double check it to be aware of. We also had one which was found basically on the packing floor. And no, I didn't pull the thread boss. There might have been some bits of thread lying around that may have come from a bar tack that somebody had just pulled a loose end on. And whether it was a badly sewn bar tack that was then unravelled, but basically, and this was at the connector link end, there was a bar tack found not to be there in the packing of a main parachute. Just kind of how it happened. We suspect that it was either badly tensioned or it had worn on one side, so it could just be pulled, but with no real evidence of that one. And it's not only lines. This is off a glide, and so your guide ring was basically stitched on without bar tacks on one of the risers. And again, the manufacturer there just kind of went, yeah, we missed that in quality control, our bad. Obviously need to look at this, but that's come out the factory, and it was found, fortunately, by the person doing the assembly, so it had never actually got into the air without being noticed, but it had come out the factory like that. So again, it's just one of those things that we need to be aware of, that quality control doesn't always work. Soft links. I think this might be something we need to kind of get out there, maybe do an article for the magazine at some point. I had one report of incorrect slinks being applied. They were slink R's on a reserve. It was just a reserve that didn't authorise the use of slink R's from the manufacturer. So the point there is that it wasn't, we've had it in the past where they've been the main slinks or whatever, but the canopy manufacturer dictates what links that you put on, and if they don't authorise the use of a slink, then you can't use that one. So it's a case worth checking whether manufacturers have said you can do this. Then you have things like the Pisa Tempo, but we're all getting a bit old now, but there is evidence out there to say yes, you can put slinks on those, because the people who sort of have design authority over it have basically said, yeah, we'll take responsibility for that. But be careful and check back with the manufacturer of the canopy, whether it's there or not. And have a good look for the damage. I mean, I think we've all probably had people that have had a reline done and not wanted to invest in a new set of slinks. So that's why I quite like using the old Thomas Sports method of subbing them on. But you do get it, and we find some damage. And normally you just see the stitching going, they start to look a bit rough and ready. This picture's not brilliant. But it's kind of pretty much half cut through, and it looks like a melt, but how that had got there. And it did take the packer getting in there and having a good look at that one. It was you, wasn't it, Gary? Yeah. But it wasn't visible from the first bit. It was actually getting your fingers in there and having a look at it. Did you ever come up with any idea of what caused that?
No, I thought it was the actual ring itself. The diameter sort of seemed to fit.
Yeah.
But why it did it, I don't know.
No. But again, just something that we need to be aware of, and slings do not last forever. Sticky patches. Sticky patches on reserve pilot chutes. We did kind of put a word out there. We did ask a number of manufacturers for their opinions. Most were do not put sticky patches on reserve pilot chutes. Some were do not ever repair a reserve pilot chute, it's replace. One manufacturer said, nah, that's fine, but it wasn't on a Javelin. Javelin or a replace. And the issue really also came up on this was that it wasn't an advanced rigger that repaired this reserve component. So, number of issues really there. It's a reserve pilot chute. If your pilot chute doesn't do the job, nothing's going to be working. The damage on the pilot chute itself wasn't actually that bad. So my concern was more what the effect the sticky patch was going to have on the performance of the pilot chute, whether that's going to cause any problems in time. And again, it was probably somebody just trying to help out, and they weren't an advanced rigger, so they shouldn't have been doing that in the first place. But if you go back to the manufacturer, then they're saying, no, don't do that. And I know we do push some things on, manufacturers say this and we say something else, but sticky patches on reserve pilot chutes, probably not a good idea. I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that before we move on.
Have we got anything in the rigger's technical docs that say that we've got a rule that we don't allow that?
No.
So it defaults to then the manufacturer's rule will apply, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So would it not be easier if we just put that in there?
Something we should think about, probably, yeah.
You might find it was that the AP just thought that they weren't breaking any rules. So, and because they're not doing any sewing, it's no actual repairing, you know, maybe they thought that they were allowed to do it.
Yeah, I mean, those of us old enough to jump round, sticky patches were, you know, students put them on canopies, because that's where I started, because it was just like you come in with your C9 and there's a hole in it, you just go and get a bit of sticky patch and put it on, because you've taught how to stretch it out over your Protec helmet and push it down. That's what you did then. So yes, that kind of thing. And I've put a sticky patch on a canopy earlier this month up at Hibblestow, walked in a little hole there, Noel cut it out, I stuck it on because I've got my knee there. So it is things that we do, but for most of us it's then like, okay, that'll do for the rest of the day, and then we'll either stitch it or we'll patch it properly. But you can't really get in and stitch that very easily. So if it needs the patch, should it be being used? It's kind of, I'm sure it was done for all the right reasons, but I still don't think it's a great idea, personally.
Part of what you've been covering, Pete, is you keep going back to manufacturing rules. Obviously, I've never seen that in any manufacturer's manual. So they're not saying don't use it or use it, but when you contact them as an individual, they say, oh, we don't do that. And it's just off the cuff, you know, because they want to be safe. So there's no system in place.
No.
But even with soft links, you say we go back to the manufacturer rules, or free loops on a free bag, we go back to the manufacturer rules. But we don't, because we can make a free bag, but suddenly we can't put Icarus soft links on a PD reserve or PD soft links on Icarus reserve when they're both fit for purpose. And it's almost like we're going back and saying, the manufacturer says this, when we think it suits our needs. And it's not, well, this is the rule. And then that can cause problems across the board anyway.
I agree with you on that. As in, what we come back to is, if you want the backing of the manufacturer, then you do what the manufacturer says. If you're going to do something contrary to what the manufacturer says, you need to back that up with your own evidence and bits and pieces, which on some things I think we can do, on other things it's not worth trying to do that. Some manufacturers now go, well, slinks from PD are TSO component, and we just need a TSO component on our gear. But it's just like, well, what about the Aerodyne soft links? What about precision soft links, and where do they go? And it goes back, I suppose, to when AirTech was saying you can't put other AADs in the pockets that we supply. And my attitude to that one, it's not Terry's chocolate orange anymore, it's mine. You know, I bought this, I bought that pocket, what I put in it, whether I put a spare pull-up in or something is up to me if it's the right dimensions for that bit. The fact that the Astra manual said put it in the cypress pockets, and AirTech didn't mind that one, but they did mind it when Vigil kind of implied the same thing. It would have helped if Vigil had actually made a pocket at that point. They do now, but we did kind of point out that maybe you should just like make some, and then we can carry on using the cypress ones, but there is an alternative. And it is, I think it's definitely a grey area, but I think there's always going to be grey areas about, are you following exactly what the manufacturer says? This manufacturer says this manufacturer says the other. So for the packers out there, it gets very confusing to always do everything. And it's really just kind of bracketing some things together and what do we think is a good idea and what isn't. I don't think that's a particularly good idea. So,
But
yeah.
surely there's a risk that that patch will adhere to another part of the pilot chute. It must be a strong risk, and that's a reserve pilot chute, for goodness sake. So, you know, we're talking about it now. There's a lot of expertise here now. It's raising concern.
I mean, a few of us will have repaired reserve pilot chutes in the past.
Yeah, with a patch.
With a patch.
Yes, indeed. But surely not that on a reserve pilot chute. No.
And some manufacturers are saying we shouldn't even do that. So, which I kind of get, because some of the jobs are quite complicated to do. So, yeah, just putting things out there to think about.
There we go. There we go, that's the badger.
And you see how it pulls back there?
Yeah.
That's what worries me.
Okay, A2 brake lines. I didn't know the sound was on. I thought I'd turn the sound off. I don't know how many of you come across the problem with the brakes on the A2. Apparently it's not uncommon. And if you do it by the manual, the secondary is on top or the other way, and if you do it the other way it's a bit better. We've also had a jumper contact airline and get the permission to not set the secondaries and to stow the secondaries by bungeeing the excess up on the canopy. That is in AOB on the meeting later on to this evening, I'd say. So it's just a thing out there that kind of where we get these things, share that information around, and then when somebody gets, as Alan says, you know, the word from the manufacturer going, yeah, you can do that, but they're not putting it out in their manuals, then we need to share that information. And sometimes they do put things in their website that they don't share around. We'll come to a couple of points on that as well.
Is that on the Sigma?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, no. Not particularly nice if you're kind of having to fight your brakes off when you're flying a tandem. So, number of safety bulletins and other bits and pieces that have come out. So, from Strong's, there's an inspection of the bridles, where there's a problem there, that kind of on their website. And then we had the thing about the manufacturer stating very clearly what the recertification requirements on master reserves are. Again, maybe that hadn't got out and around unless people were double checking and reading the manuals again. So we circulated that again to kind of point out it does need to go back at 10 and 18 years as a life on the master. So 22-year-old master reserves, the manufacturer is saying you shouldn't be using. So they were out there. More recent one, the clamps on, it's a tandem atom, I think it was a military tandem atom actually. But again, they kind of said, yeah, and have a look at all of them. And it's not only Parachutes de France that we've had a problem with the clamps coming off. Chris Lynch was packing a set of kit and just sent me a picture and going, how do we fix this? And it's just come off the end. And you know, you get the proper tool. So it is something to watch out for. I have given all of my atoms a good tug, and they're all fixed quite well. But they found that one or two, and of course we had a problem with these clamps on the fires and where that was positioned, so it was snagging on rings. So the clamps are probably a better idea than the wax thread knotted around and everything else that we all hated doing the hand stitching, but they do have their own problems. I don't know if anyone's come across any of those. UPT, again, just things that kind of get out without being necessarily widely known. They put out things on their website about the riser compatibility, and if you're changing from double L links to aileron rapid links or the other way around, they do produce the instructions explaining how they're supposed to be done. But again, it's one of those things, somebody swaps over a reserve, do they know that that's what they're doing? We're talking about APTs, do they understand that? And then there was the issue over the reserve of flap on the student kit, which actually, when you try and find it on UPT's website, you look at all the safety bulletins and it's not there. You actually have to look for airworthiness directives. It's not an easy find. But then hopefully that got out and it's there. And it's one of those things that I would ask people. Karen sent me through a safety bulletin today, I haven't seen it yet. So if you come across something, do send it in. If you find it in the manual and thinking, oh, I'm not sure about that, send it in. It may be one that we've sent out and you haven't seen, but yeah, let's make sure we pick those things up. Although we get on very well with UPT, they don't send us all their information routinely to the office, historically. So it is quite often a case of trawling things and finding things. So I'm more than happy when people send me an email going, have you seen this? Sometimes that's because it's the French rattling on, we'll come to that one in a minute, rather than the manufacturer. But again, information is power, and the more we share that information around, the better for everyone. Aerodyne, a couple of things came out there, one from the French. Just basically, they still think that the bridle should be routed from the top to the bottom, but they're quite happy for you to route it from the bottom and back to the bottom. That's on their website. And the French have now decided that you must locate the cypress cutter above the spring on icons. They said that in 2008 or something. So when this kind of came out from the French, it was like, but you said that already. Why they've now kind of made it airworthiness directive or something in France, I'm not sure. They had an issue over some of the problem, some loosely packed atoms, that icon's not clearing properly.
But there was a safety notice the first time around as well, so we have to follow it.
No, it was basically the French wanted that, but Aerodyne said you can. This is, you don't have to. So it didn't, from the manufacturers, it remains an alternative. It's just the French are now saying if you're jumping in
the
like
French Association, not the manufacturer.
Yeah.
So the association have said this based on a safety notice that happened a long time ago. And
yeah, which is what they'd asked for already. So I'm not quite sure why they've kind of like put the word out there.
So there was a bulletin that came out that rescinded the first bulletin. So the first bulletin said to put it on flap 3, and then Aerodyne issued another one saying it doesn't really matter whether it's on flap 1 or flap 3. And one this morning that's come out is that the I1 and up to the I5 now have to have it on flap 3.
Right, and
that's come out this morning.
And that's from Aerodyne.
That's from Aerodyne.
Okay,
yeah.
right. There you go. New information coming out. So we'll get that circulated as well. I've done it on a couple of rigs because we actually did it on tandem atoms as well. They kind of moved it, but that was the manufacturer saying it. So this one was a curious one because it came from the French Federation wanting the manufacturer to do something. The manufacturer said you can do that then, fill your boots. We'll approve that modification, but you don't have to. So the Brits and the Americans didn't need to do it. But if now they're saying, well, on some of them, you do need to. So again, it's watching how these things develop. It's interesting. Again, those of us that are long enough and know how to thread buckles, and in Tony Knight's old manual, there was a picture of it and what have you, about how you threaded for snap-ons and everything else. But yeah, then again, the manufacturer had managed not to pick it up in quality control. The adjustable lift web was routed the wrong way round, so the weight's going on the little lug, not the big lug, and oddly enough it didn't lock properly because it's not designed that way, and was basically ripping the end off the other end and sliding. So again, it's a manufacturer's problem. There was no evidence that it was being adjusted or altered or anything else. It had just been put together wrong. So again, putting together a new set of kit, don't assume that the manufacturer's done all the quality control checks and along the way. I mean, I remember having a great puzzle when I was first back in reserves, trying to work out how to untangle this line on a reserve, and then finally worked out I had to unpick the bar tack on the stabiliser because they'd actually just crossed the lines and then put the last thing that they sew is the stabilisers onto the line, and they've managed to trap another line in it. But you don't think that's what they've done, so you spend ages trying to work out how do you untangle this, and there was no way of untangling it. That was a reserve straight out of the plastic bag, so we do need to check the manufacturers sometimes. They mostly do a good job. Also reported to SEC through the incident reports. In June, there were 6 reports of malfunctions due to problems with the brakes, either brake fires or brake locks, or lines entangling and everything else. And that was just one of them. And pretty frayed up lower brake line. But it was interesting that there were 6 reports in 1 month. And you think, well, quite a lot of brake problems probably don't get reported to the CI, let alone anything else. If they've managed to land it, they kind of, oh yeah, I had a bit of a problem there, and it won't come in as a report. But again, it was curious, and that was why it's flagged up that there were quite so many in 1 month. And again, maybe that's back down to owners not packing, so they're not looking at their kit so much, packers packing in a hurry, and maybe mentioning it to the owner when they think to, but some packers pack, stack them up, they don't even talk to the person they're packing for. So little things that we're kind of aware of. Maybe things have changed that people don't pack now, so they don't look at these things.
The RAF are looking at one with almost an identical photograph right now. Actually, it's just over in Paris, and they're hiring the Paris packers, but supervised by the Oak boys. I don't care what I'm saying, but they've identified a few issues, but they're already sort of looking at packers. But I'm looking at that. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly 1 or 2 of the reports involved where the excess was stowed or how the excess was stowed or not stowed.
And it's the, if I'm not mistaken, that's not elastic, is it? That's
no, it's
line intake.
Yeah.
You put a different thickness of line in there. The illustration in the manual, I think, shows quite thin microlight duct stowed like that. But you stick Dacron in there because you're on a student canopy, it won't bloody fit very well.
Yeah.
Funny if it don't want to come out either.
Yeah, which then is creating more damage to it and other things. But, and then in September there were 4 reports of baglocks, and one of which was semi-stowless bag, and they'd managed to route it wrongly. So instead of coming out the normal part of the opening, it was actually coming out the bottom corner.
Is it the same packer?
So it's kind of,
that's what size.
you sort of think that bag locks, okay, they sound like a really bad thing. John LeBlanc would say it's not the worst malfunction that you can have, because it's one that you know is happening very quickly. So better you have a bag lock than a harness failure. But 4 being reported in the same month, yeah, I suppose September, that's covering July and August jumping, so it was probably our busiest time, but just
Were they all at different drop zones, Pete?
Say again?
Were they all at different drop zones?
Yeah. So Jeff had just picked up that they'd all, similar incidents had come in all at once. And that's one of the things that we try and do when we get reports, and why I'd encourage people to file equipment related instrument reports, so that we see if there's a trend, if we're seeing the same sort of things scattered around the place, whether we're seeing a lot of worn soft links or brake line problems or whatever it is. So encourage you to kind of get those in.
Information on the actual setup that caused the backlogs. For example, if you're using Dacron lines with large bungees on size 2 grommets, there's a good chance to get the backlog. But if you're using micro lines with small bungees on size 2, it's fine. And have you got any trends like that?
No, it was, they all seemed slightly different, and we didn't get into the grommet sizes on the couple. But the curious one was the semi-stainless bag, where they just routed it out the wrong slot. It was going to be routed out of the corner, so it had 2 stiffeners to kind of pull out in a direction that you don't have to pull out any of the stiffeners when it's working properly. So yeah, it's kind of. But again, you would have thought they're tuck flaps. You would think that it would come out, but how much drag is doing and when does the pilot chip collapse? So kind of number of variables. But I was just curious that there were 4 the same. And that's really just my little resume of the reports over a couple of years. Unless anyone wants to talk about anything else on those things, that's all that I have on that one. So, is it time to have a look at inspection and repack cycles? We moved to, well, I started packing reserves when it was 3 months intervals. Then it went to 4 months. The Americans always kind of do 90 and 120 days, and then we moved, 30 years ago, we moved to doing it every 6 months. And I think we were probably one of the first countries to do that. I think we were definitely the first. And the Americans eventually, many years later, decided to move to 180 days. So 30 years ago we changed. About 20 years ago, I believe, that's when Germany extended it. And for the second time, riggers considered whether we should extend again. We'd already considered it once. John Curtis had raised it, and then 20 years ago, Tony Butler raised it. And then about 5 years ago, Australia did a phased introduction for initially B licence, and then moving to include A licence, because having spoken to them, they're having people with A licence getting their B licence, but their reserves only packed for 6 months, but now it could be 12. That was kind of a bit of a nightmare situation. So probably won't quite do that one if we go that way. So what do we want to do? Do we think that moving to a longer time period is a good idea, or do we want to keep it at 6 months? Alan raised it at the last riggers meeting, which was in 2019, as a discussion item, and we felt that we needed to get more information in and back up what were just feelings and working out things. So we started to do that. I don't think we got all the information in yet, but we did start to pull things out from the manufacturers, mostly just out of their manuals and what have you. Performance Designs did their permeability study, and as part of that, they reflected that it's the reserve packing that affects the permeability and therefore the performance of the reserve rather than age. So that's why we've got the 40 boxes on the PD canopy, and you send it back, and we had 2 come back last week, one with 25 new boxes on and one with 40 new boxes on. So that reserve is going to be quite old by the time it gets there, and that's with us packing it every 6 months. So there's an argument that could be made that it's the handling of the reserve that does the damage, not it keeping it packed. The longitudinal studies of opening speeds and what have you are fairly limited in their scope, because how long are you keeping how many rigs packed before you kind of open them in a measured kind of way. But there have been studies done, and the slowing up happens in the first month, and then it pretty much plateaus out. You know, once you're about 4 or 5 months, it's not really altering very much in normal conditions. So other manufacturers kind of look at so that's PD. They actually say that they're happy that we go to a yearly inspection and repack. We're trying to get a little bit more information out of them at the moment, because we seem to feel that John or somebody has been more clearly stating that that's okay, whereas it's just a line in the manual. Aerodyne pretty much the same, and again in their manual they're saying that in normal conditions 1 year intervals are approved. Parachutes France, again in a couple of places, including tandems, they're kind of saying up to 1 year is approved. Paratech within 12 months, Strong's 365 days, Icarus up to 1 year. So they're the ones that I managed to find from the manuals. Other manufacturers have said, right, you need to do this, which is the FAA rules, which is 180 days, and then they put in the rider, unless your country does something different, in which case what your country says is fine. So there's kind of get out of jail cards, if you like, on that one, where they've just kind of realised they're shooting themselves in the foot if they're going to try and apply American rules across the world and they want to sell their stuff elsewhere. But it's something we just need to kind of double check on, I think, really. So try and get some more information from them. And then we're looking at what other countries have been doing, and there are a number of countries which Karen kind of put this together for us, and some of that has changed a little bit probably since when we first did that, and again that's what we need to try and get some information on exactly what is out there. So some countries have an inspection in between, some are it's just 12 months, some 12 months for sport kit but not for student kit. So again, we need to do that, and I think we also need to get some information from the likes of Germany in terms of what's been their experience. Are they glad that they did this, or what are the problems that they've had in the transition, or do they wish they hadn't done it? So we just need to kind of get a little bit of that information coming through. The ones that we seem to kind of think at the moment, Germany, I think, is the longest that's been on 12-month cycle. Say Australia's a split one. France, I thought, was split as well, but apparently not. And so again, Portugal, Denmark, Poland, and then USA and Canada, who we spoke to the other day. Canada was sort of saying something along the lines that we kind of understand that there might be safety implications in that handling it is bad, so the less we handle it, maybe that's a good thing. But they're also kind of going, Big Brother next door is governed by the government rather than by the association, so that might be a bigger problem, and Canada are reluctant to go against what the neighbours do at the moment. But it was an interesting debate. I'll get some more information from that conversation later on. So they're the sort of things that we want to think about, and what we need to kind of get a bit more information in. What's their experience? Are they glad they've done it? And what have you? Because what I believe we need to do before we make a decision is we gather that information together. I don't want to come up from riggers going, right, let's have this idea, and then SDC send it back to us. Or SDC go, that's a good idea, and then council send it back to us. You know, or the CAA get involved, or the insurers get involved. And it's back to what Rick terms thud factor. That the more background that we put together, the more questions that we answer before they get asked, the easier that road will be through. And I don't think that that's going to take us a huge amount of time to gather those missing bits together. People are already trying to do those things. And then we've got to think about what are the drawbacks of us extending the repack cycle, inspection and repack cycle. And we need to think those through and try and get ahead of the game. Mains. Do we want main canopies to be packed for 12 months? Currently what it says in the ops manual is all canopies need to be packed every 6 months. This was packed for 6 months. So it only got about half a dozen jumps, and then it's been basically put away for 6 months. And this was just coming in for inspection and repack.
What conditions was it going to be in? All the containers?
It was just packed for jumping, then not being jumped for 6 months, and not aware that it was wrapped up in cellophane and kept in a tropical country and then stuck in the back of a Hercules, which has happened in the past to create some issues. But this was, I believe, just kept in his house. And that was sent down to me at about the same time as Simon Soper opened a Icarus main in the packing shed at headquarters, and it came out of the bag easy enough as a brick, and we dropped the brick a few times, and then we pulled the slider out, and pretty much the brick just closed back again, and it was very much like that. So this wasn't a single canopy. We had it. They were both Icaruses, we've had a couple of others where they've been packed for more than 6 months that, it probably would have opened, but really. So that then brings us to the way we word things in the operations manual at the moment is all parachutes must be inspected and packed every 6 months. Do we then need to make something, if we go to 12 months or 9 months or whatever we decide to do we need to put something in there about zero porosity canopies need to be aired and what have you over a period of bits and pieces? Yes,
but, obviously Icarus New Zealand and Icarus Europe use very different material suppliers. One even packs 30% larger than the other one. They're very different, and so could it be down to specific material type? Because I've never seen that before on the Icarus canopies that I've worked with. They've been packed a long time, definitely over a year.
Yeah.
And I've had parachutes packed for over 3 or 4 years. I've pulled them. I've never seen that. So it's got to be down to a specific type of material.
It's not only Icarus, because one was an Aerodyne canopy that again been packed for about a year. Wasn't as bad as that, but it was definitely kind of there. And again, Rick can kind of put in some details of military equipment, what have you. Definitely the conditions it's stored in and the way it's treated will affect these things. But again, we need to think about that, how many people are finding, we've had an opportunity, haven't we, really, with the lockdown, is quite a few of us have been packing things that were packed for some time. One of the reasons why I got interested in the idea of extending the repack cycle is over the last 2 years I've had opportunity to pack things that have been packed for a year or two. I have kit that's only used for the water jump, so that's only ever used if we don't do the water jump. It stays packed for probably the year before I can repack it again for the next one. So I've been seeing kit within a year, but the pandemic has given us the opportunity to see things that have been packed for more than that, heading towards 2 years in some cases. And none of the reserves that I've opened gave me any reason to suspect that they weren't going to open fine. I couldn't say the same about all the mains that I opened. So I don't want to kind of come up with a thing that says, okay, you can leave your kit for 12 months, and then that's what somebody's trying to get open above their head 11 months down the line. It's just like, it's very unlikely, is it? Why would you do that? But do we need to put something in there, build something in on the main side of things?
Does the manufacturer see this? Does the manufacturer see this?
I'm not sure. I'll check with them.
The thing that buzzes in my head right now watching that is, would that have happened if you'd opened that 2 months after the main pack? It could be that it's not affected. It already happened the day it was packed in whatever conditions it was packed in, or you know what I mean? It could not. It might be that it was just as bad a week after it was packed. So the year's almost red herring, if you like.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, the ones that I tend to, my hands have been on are the ones that have been packed a long time, and when you get the bag off, the size and the shape doesn't matter, and you can literally kick it and it's still not wanting to come out. Whereas, you know, others, as soon as it's out the bag, it's trying to, you know, mushroom itself out. We know from trying to pack the damn things, they want to do that. So that's just sort of some of the thoughts. And where do we go from here? We've already started in a way. I want to have a working group, short-lived, just to pull those bits of information together. And that way we can present a paper which can then follow its way through SDC and Council with the evidence that we've gathered together, and not just a vote at riggers saying, yeah, we think this is a good idea. Andy?
Can I ask what we're trying to achieve? Like, why extend it 12 months?
Yeah, so again, you know, do we think it's a good idea? We could put hands up and have a show of hands, see where we're going on this. For me, it's like, is there any reason for repacking something that doesn't require it? How does the reserve get packed? When PD and others are going, it's the handling of the canopy that is doing the damage. So is that a good thing? Well, if it makes the reserve safer because it's getting handled less, then that's a good thing. If it's just, I think it would be easier to do this or whatever. So they're the things that we need to kind of establish. Yeah, exactly. Why we think it's a good idea.
Well, I've had
there's excessive wear and tear on containers more than actually the reserve when you look at it.
Yeah.
Just
And UPT don't make parachutes, but that's what they would say is that, you know, the damage that the tandem rig goes through in a year. But it's the rig itself. It's not the reserve that's enclosed and everything else. So, you know, other countries have done this. Do we think that's a good idea, or do we want to stay with what we're doing? Do we want to go to 9 months? Do we want to go to 12 months for everything, or 12 months for just sport equipment and keep tandems and student kit out of it? If you look at privately owned aircraft, they have a different maintenance schedule than everything else to a commercially owned and operated or for hire aircraft, you know, which are checked every 50 or 100 hours, whereas a privately owned kit-built aircraft may only require its annual inspection. So within aviation, there are sort of precedents around having different things for different things, like Australia do. So students are 6 months and sport kit can be up to 12, and it's up to, so the packer can say, no, I'm not going to do that because you're jumping on a beach or whatever. We're not going to extend it that much. And that gets complicated, I think, but what I want is to gather those things together and get people feeding stuff in. So if people are really interested in being on the working group, and there's a few people I'd like to be on the working group, but I don't want it to be a working group like some of ours, which has gone on for years. I want to get this stuff together, and people have already started that, fortunately, and maybe be in a position to present something at the next riggers meeting, which hopefully will be in April, or by the one after that, with thud factor, one way or the other, you know, and go, yeah, we've looked at this and we're going to leave it alone for, you know, the foreseeable, or these countries have done this and they've not had any problems, in which case there's something we can look at. Sorry, there's a hand up. Steve.
Pete, I think the present system, the 6 monthly inspection and repack cycle system that we have, is a very, very good one, especially for older equipment and heavily used equipment. So, for example, like a cameraman, busy drop zone. You know, even with new equipment, it's putting a lot of use on the system. And you take the focus there on just one aspect, and that was the actual damage done to a reserve during the repack cycles. But there's a whole lot more to it than that. I think the present system that we've got is good. It's a fair compromise. It's much better than a 3-month or a 4-month system in terms of reduced number of reserve repacks. But think of the times that we've all found at the 6-monthly inspection, equipment that does need immediate or urgent attention, that if that had gone on for 9 months or 12 months, then maybe it would have been missed. So I think that we've also got to defend our present system as well. It's a good compromise, and it's got a lot going for it.
I'm not saying that we definitely want to change. I'm saying we should look at it and come to a reasoned and defensible position on it.
Yeah, sure. But the system we've got at the moment does work well. And I think it's good.
Okay, Andy.
This argument, it seems to be the justification for what I see as a money-saving thing. But anyway, this justification of damaging these parachutes that badly that they're, extended, doesn't seem to be an argument when they're recertifying them for another 20 years.
Okay. Some, not all, but some, yeah.
I disagree. I mean, everyone is sending canopies back to PD now. They're doing processing tests, they're relighting them and saying this is how long you've got left on it, depending on how you've used it and do this. But what they also said, if that canopy was inside that container for 12 months, that prosody test is going to be better when it goes back for testing, and they're going to relight it for longer. It is about the lifespan of your equipment, I get that. But the canopy itself gets deteriorated when it's open and packed. When it's in the container, it doesn't deteriorate. But the container, on the other hand, has a lot of wear and tear which needs a full inspection. So having the canopy in the container for a year, I've got no concerns with it at all. Having the container inspected every 6 months, I think is still mandatory, because the wear and tear depends on the usage, the volume, and that's a different ballgame again. So that's why I'm all for having a 6-monthly inspection on the harness and container, and even the main, because they get loads used or not. But the reserve stays in the container. I think that's better for everybody. You're not going to get any canopy blown up because it's old and it's been abused a lot every 6 months. That's what another way of looking at it.
I'll throw a hat in the ring here on this. Guess what he said. But let's pretend for a minute we're not in the perfect UK rule, and let's pretend that we know how to pack reserves. And let's pretend that maybe we know our reserve repack is the best reserve repack you've ever seen. So let's just pretend for a minute, it's truly not taking any minutes, that I know some people that have packed a reserve for their own personal kit, and that's where it sits, and that's called a pencil pack, because that person, that imaginary person, knows perfectly well that reserve is fine where it is, and it sits there for years like that. Yeah? So let's pretend that we know people that do that. Okay? Doesn't that prove that a reserve can sit there for a year quite fine? And if that person, that was an imaginary person, that may even be in this room, lives that way, and they know the kit better than anybody else on the damn drop zone, then what is the problem with leaving it back for a year? If you know anyone like that.
But I think the point Alan made about, and other people made about heavily used kit, the external inspection. So that then, we kind of did that with the COVID extensions, and there were a few issues around that, like who can extend that? Can it only be by the packer? Yes, I think. Because does the packer want somebody else extending their repack cycle who's taking responsible, for that? So they're the things that we need to kind of go, right, okay, if that's what we're going to recommend, then how do we build that in? And you need to kind of get those things, because we didn't quite get that right in the COVID bits. So there's a whole number of things, which is why I feel we've got to do a little bit more background and getting a little bit more information in, and think about those things, so that we don't keep coming back and we need to tweak that, we need to tweak that. When we brought in the inspection checklist, ROI, 30 years ago, nearly every meeting of riggers has an alteration to that form after the form came in for about the next year. And that eventually included taking the mains off, because that initially you had to put the serial number of the main on and everything. So it's like, let's not do that. Let's try and use this opportunity and get that information coming in, and think through those potential problems, so that literally we can produce a paper which can then go out and be properly discussed and everything else. So that's why I'm kind of wanting input from people now, one way or the other. So the people who think, what are we trying to do this for? We can imagine this set of kit here, sends us a picture of it going like, that's after 6 months, what's it going to look like after 12? Just get that information in. So we come up with it scientifically rather than, but that's what Germany have done, so that's what we're going to do, or whatever.
Is it worth just at this point excluding tandem rigs and student equipment and just focus on personally on equipment?
I mean, that's the Australian model. I'm not sure with some of the other countries what their feelings on that are. When I'm leaning in that direction personally. It would be simpler to administer if everything was 12 months. But I think we have a different duty of care to student equipment and tandem equipment, that is equipment used by students. And then we have a grey area about kit hire stuff. So most centres have kit that they rent to experienced jumpers, either on a one-off jump basis, or there's companies out there, XD, Romec, that hire kit for a month or 6 months or whatever. So what would be their position on that? Could that be 12 months or would that need to be 6 months? Not sure, I haven't kind of figured that one out, that's what I'm saying.
I don't see the logic on that.
thing.
You can't just look at the equipment itself. Who's using it shouldn't be relevant, whether it's a student, an experienced jumper, or attendants. It shouldn't be relevant. It's about the canopy in the container and then the inspection on the harness and everything else. If you look at tandem kit now, the amount of inspections you've got every 30 days, it's covered because it's got high use and you put an extra care into having tandems, but that canopy is the same whether it's in a student rig, tandem rig or an expert rig, and that shouldn't differ depend on who's jumping it. There's no logic in that to me.
But your suggestion of we still need to do an external inspection at 6 months,
They do.
rather than some countries don't do that, it's just 12 months. So they're the things that we need to kind of make sure that what
So
we're
I was trying to
doing.
cover that we do already do that split system whereby it doesn't need to be the packer that does the 100 jump inspection. So we already do that on a
On
tandem
tandem.
system. So that argument whereby the packer should then check the kit after 6 months, to me, you need to look at how we do the paperwork, because then somebody doing an external check, they're not doing a repack, they're just checking the kit.
Yeah.
We'd have a similar system to.
So who would it need to be? Yeah. So that's why these are all totally relevant points, and these are the things that we need to kind of pull out. I'm just kind of aware of
I
time.
personally, in actually the same with the main, you check the harness, container and the main. But then again, I've always checked the main every reserve repack I've ever done. I know a lot of people don't. To me, if I don't check that main, hang it up and check it and give it back to a customer saying that kit's safe to jump, I don't feel like I've done my job properly. I charge you for it, but they're willing to pay for it. But on the other hand, I've had a lot of customers that didn't know there was something wrong with the main, because I respected it. They're happy to pay me to upgrade it and make it safe for them, so you get a lot of extra work for it as well. So I won't pack a reserve without doing the main. And I think if you're inspecting the harness every 6 months, the main is the one that gets used and abused, you should be checking that every 6 months.
Well, maybe that's what we need to build in. It is, you inspect the main and the container, and that, who does that need to be? So I'm over time, so if we can just final comments and bits and pieces. Andy?
A couple of things. One is how are you going to inspect sharp from it, from the outside? And the other thing is, if this hypothetical packer has pencil packed, they've packed it wrong, how's that going checked? It's going to be twice as long.
Twice as long, yeah.
By any other packer, so.
And I don't know where the statistician, some mathematician can work this one out for me, but it's like, if there's an error, it's now being used for 12 months, is that statistically more dangerous than there's an error and it's being used for 6 months before that error gets found?
If it was packed correctly, then,
Yeah, no,
then 6 months.
exactly. You kind of
So, I
don't-
mean, you've got,
yeah,
that's absolutely
exactly.
rubbish.
So really what I wanted to do today was just to say, okay, this is something that we need to do some thinking and some research on, and pull these ideas together. And it's not something that we can just have a 10-minute chat at Riggers and come up with a proposal of. So anybody that wants to participate in pulling this information together, then please contact me. Otherwise I will be coming and asking specific people. And I would like people who have strong feelings against it to feed that in. It doesn't have to be the people who think 12 months is a good idea. You might think 9 months is a better idea, although I think that would create a bottleneck for when everyone's going to want it packed in March. Well, you kind of have that anyway, don't we? So that's what I'm asking for, and this will be going out. So anybody that's interested, got strong feelings or not, then yeah, put your name forward, email me, and we'll pull something together. And I would like to pull a meeting together on Teams in the next month and get this thing going. And I know some people are already doing some of the background work for me on some of the things that we've already thought of, but there are other things that we perhaps need to think about a bit more. how we do it and who does it. So thank you. That kind of went on. I'm going to stop talking now and hand you over to Alan. Okay, thank you.